All right, what's up, everybody? Roy here, and you were listening to the Balanced Mill podcast series. Today's episode will be a dad talk, and in this dad talk, I have Nick Adams. Now, Nick Adams is not only the father of 4 children, but he's also the author of the book Being the Dad You Wish You Had: 5 Big Stones for Effective Fatherhood. And in this book, Nick explores the power you have as a dad and helps fathers overcome the fears, limiting beliefs that hold you back as a father. Welcome, Nick. Glad to have you on.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you, Roy.
Yeah. Real quick, where are we talking to you? Where are you right now?
I am in Northeast Tennessee.
Okay.
It's a little town called Kingsport. We're right up in the corner
Mhm.
of the eastern side of Tennessee.
Oh, cool. That's awesome. Yeah, my mom's side of the family, we are all from West Tennessee, a little town called Rutherford.
Okay, I know of Rutherford. I can't really say that I know where Rutherford is, but I know the name.
Yeah, we I think I was up there visiting my mom over in August, and I'm in Virginia Beach, and I forgot how long that state is.
It goes on and on. You can spend 8 hours in Tennessee.
I know. It's so funny. And it's funny how you go from like Northeast, which is this mountain, just super like, the Smoky Mountains, all that. And then you get into like flat farmland and back into the mountains. It's wild.
Yeah, it's a pretty state, but it is a long drive from end to end.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It took me 14 hours maybe to get from where I am to Memphis. Yeah,
Yeah, that
14
sounds
hours.
about right. Yeah.
Mhm. So so you are a father and you wrote this awesome book, Being the Dad You Wish You Had. Um, I thought the book was great. I
Thank you.
enjoyed I enjoyed I want to start with the metaphor of the 5 stones.
Okay.
And I loved the story that you mentioned with the 5 stones with the jar. And I wondered if you could just explain that really quickly for us.
Sure, absolutely.
Hmm.
It's often I heard it first with Stephen Covey, and it's
Hmm.
often kind of used in the context of time management,
Yeah.
and that's really the context that I've applied it in most often.
Uh-oh, lost you for a sec there, Nick. We got you back.
Okay, not
Hit
sure what
mute.
happened, but
Yeah, it's
I'm glad
okay.
I'm back.
Yeah.
So just realize that there's like some big things. If you get them in place,
Hmm.
then fatherhood is it may not be perfect, but you're going to be effective. And
Hmm.
so the story goes like this: that a professor came into his classroom and he put a big jar on the table or a big bucket on his desk, and he filled it up with big stones.
Hmm.
And then he said to his class, "Is the bucket full?" And they all said, "Yes, the bucket's full." And so then he reached under the desk and he pulled out a bucket of smaller stones and he pours all these small stones in. And of course, they fill in between the big stones. And he asks his class, "Is the bucket full?" And they're like, they kind of caught on and they're like, "Well, probably not." And so then he reaches under the desk and he pulls out a bag of sand and he pours sand into the bucket and until it's to the top. And he's like, "Okay, is the bucket full?" And then they kind of laugh and they're like, "Probably not." And so he pulls out water and he pours
Hmm.
it into the bucket. And just the picture there is if you fill the bucket with water,
Hmm.
then you can't put stones in. If you fill the bucket with sand, then you can't put stones in. If you fill the bucket with gravel, then you can't put the big stones in. But if you put the big stones in first, then there's all kinds of other things that you can add to that bucket. And so in writing this book, what I'm not trying to tell everybody, here's how to be the perfect dad. I don't think I have that much wisdom. but but what I'm trying to do is say here's some big things. And
Hmm.
if you can figure out what you want those big things to look like, then most of the rest of it is going to fit in the bucket and you're going to be okay.
Yeah, it's like lay the foundation before you build the house,
Exactly.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, and I love the analogy, especially for me. My son is young, and I feel like where I'm at in fatherhood, in life is I'm constantly thinking about that foundation. What do I want parenting to be like for me?
Yeah.
What are the big things that I want, my son to know things like that. And I think it's so important for us as parents and fathers to just sort of like get the big stuff in there, right?
Exactly, exactly. Because if you there's too much in life, you can't do it all,
Mhm.
and you
Yeah.
can't do it all well. But
Hmm.
if you can do the important things relatively well, I think it makes a huge impact on your family, on your fatherhood, on your children.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I noticed it's hard to pause in when your kids like in this toddler age that I'm in to sort of stop and think. It's like you're kind of like drinking from a fire hose. You're
Right.
kind of like going, go, go, go. We got to keep going. And I feel like I blinked at my kids 4.5 now. And it's easy to just get caught up in that and to not really get to like, well, how do I want to be a parent?
Yeah.
And because a lot of us end up going back to just what we had before or things like that, not really having intentionality in what we're doing.
I think that is such a huge word. Intentionality is just so
Yeah.
important because if you can figure out, you know, what do I want it to look like?
Hmm.
What do I want my children to experience? What
Hmm.
do I want them to experience of me and of
Hmm.
life? And then you can put some things in place that, and one of the things I try to always keep saying, I'll probably drive you crazy repeating myself, but it's just, you're not ever going to get it all right.
Yeah.
You're always going to have stuff that's just, you wish it was different.
Hmm.
But if you can get those big pieces, if
Hmm.
you can be intentional about a few things, then I think it makes a world of difference.
Yeah. And when you were thinking about starting this book, was it like a lightning bolt moment or like a slow drip kind of thing?
You know, the answer would be yes,
Yeah.
because I didn't realize that there had been a slow drip going
Hmm.
on.
Yeah.
And then
Hmm.
there was a moment of lightning, and so kind of what had happened is I've done a few different things in my life. I own a couple of businesses, a couple of small businesses, and I've founded and have been the director of a youth camp, and I've been, just done a lot of different things. And one of the things in working with students and in working with people in my business, I found myself saying so often, I'd be talking with somebody about an employee or a difficult situation with a student, and I just hear myself saying they were raised by wolves. And it's just there is just they don't have what they need to be a human. Like,
Hmm.
there's not anything wrong with them except they don't have what they need to be able to engage life in an
Yeah.
effective way. And so they're just it's a train wreck,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
I've just over and over and over had that observation and just really longed to be able to help people
Hmm.
have the foundation that they didn't get as a child. And
Yeah.
so that has just kind of been the slow drip that had probably been going on for years, that it's a slow drip in the background. But then one night we were sitting at the dining room table, and we from time to time we would do like conversation starters. And so we were reading out of it's just a box of cards with conversation starters. And my son read this question that was something to the effect of, if you could change one thing in the world, what would it be? And that was my lightning moment. It's
Hmm.
like there was this lightning strike. I didn't even have to think about it. Immediately, I knew if I could change one thing, I would create effective fathers. Because if you
Nice.
could have effective fathers, you change the world.
Hmm.
And so that was my lightning bolt moment. And
Yeah.
so then from there, I launched into writing this book.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's a an author that Franciscan monk, I believe that's what it was, Richard Rohr, and he did a lot
Yeah,
with prison inmates, and
yeah,
he does talks a lot about the need for fathers and what he saw with when he was the chaplain for these inmates and just their longing for fathers, and so it's cool that you are tapping into this.
yeah, absolutely. It is I think in our nation, but really worldwide, it is a
Hmm.
huge need.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you come from a distant father. Am I safe to say that, with like, he wasn't present in your life? And
Right.
so you have sort of that look of like, well, this is what the outlook of this is what it was like for me not having a father. And then I'm reading it as, well, my father was present in my life until 4 years ago. And so it's just really interesting to see how, like, I was picking up on a lot that you learned, and it's like I learned it from my dad, but it's like you learned it yourself, which is interesting.
Okay.
you know but let's talk about the stones that you had are the power of being, modeling the way, be lovable, the foundation of self-worth, and unconditional love and support. Those were the sort of the big stones of fatherhood. And I really enjoyed it. I love that you put, my favorite one is be lovable
Okay.
and the foundation of self-worth. Because I think when you think of dads, very rarely is it like people would say like lovable. It's like distant stone, like the authoritative figure,
Right. Right.
and just that self-worth. I thought that because that's what I got from my father. Like, he was very much the type of dad that was like, you do what you want, live the life that you want to live. I'm proud of you, things like that. So it was really cool. So how did you just, I mean, was it just like you just landed on these stones, or is it something that you were doing as a father?
I think it's a combination. I mean, when I started writing the book,
Mhm.
my I have four children, and we kind of have two different families, but not really. I've got one wife, and it's got a long, kind of a little gap in between the
Mhm.
children. So I've got
Yeah.
four children, two children who are adults, and then two who, at the time I was writing this book, were in elementary school. And so we've got
Yeah.
a pretty good little gap between them. And my older two were already in college when I started writing this book. And so part of it was I'd already raised children to adulthood and
Mhm.
was kind of reflecting back on what had been effective. Part of it was, I've done a lot of reading through the years to try to be a better father. Of course, I've worked with children both as a youth pastor and a camp director, and all kinds of ways. Children and working with either kids or teenagers has
Mhm.
pretty much been my whole life. So a lot of just reflection on what worked well for kids.
Mhm.
What was it when you see successful children? What were some of the pieces that kind of came together for them? And so those were the things that I was drawing from. But as I
Mhm.
started writing the book, I really didn't have these five stones solid. I had chapters, and I knew what I wanted to
Yeah.
talk about in each chapter, and then
Mhm.
I started putting them together in categories.
Mhm.
And then it's like, okay, these are the five big things that I want to focus on. And so it was kind of, it morphed as I kept writing.
Awesome. So you mentioned that you have four kids. And so you have two daughters they're adults now, or I mean,
They are.
mhm.
One
And
of
then
them is 24 and the other one is 22.
oh man, that's an age gap. And then you have, well, not an age gap with them, but then you have the two sons, and one of them is adopted, correct?
That's correct. Our youngest son is adopted. And
Mhm.
then, so they are now, both of them are 12 right now. My oldest
Wow.
son is getting ready to be 13. But
Hmm.
when I wrote the book, they were both still well, when I started with the book has been a long process. Let me tell you
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
It
Yeah.
wasn't like I just threw it out there
Mhm.
overnight. But when I first started, they were in elementary school, and now they're both in middle school,
Wow. So you have two kids in middle school.
and two out of college.
Man, middle school was the tough times for me. How's that been for you guys?
You know, we I've laughed to myself quite a bit recently.
Mhm.
My my youngest son, my adopted son, has some developmental issues,
Mhm.
and I could write a whole book about the really really funny, hilarious stories of of his life and being
Mhm.
his father, and just there's nothing quite like it.
Yeah.
But he's just moved into sixth grade. this year, and it's been a huge change for him.
Mhm.
And I can't tell you. I mean, probably I get a call from the school every week, and I've probably been in the principal's office with him, I don't know, 4 or 5 times this,
Mhm.
in the past 4 months. So it's just like, I don't know how good I'm doing at parenting this one. It's a true struggle, but yeah. So middle school is fun. My older son, he's starting to come into that full. I'm a teenager
Mhm.
with all the baggage that goes with that, and so say, oh, this is fun. But overall, my experience has always been, I just love every stage of their life.
Mhm.
Like, and I'm kind of a sentimental guy. For a guy, I think I'm pretty sentimental.
Yeah.
And so I always would dread, oh gosh, the kids are going to go to school, and oh my gosh, now they're in middle school, and oh my
Mhm.
gosh, now they're driving. And as they get older and older, it's like I just would always dread the things I would lose. But it has never been that way. It's always been when they get to that next stage, it's like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. This is so
Yeah.
much fun, and like when the girls moved away to college, I was like, oh my God, now the girls are gone. But it's never actually been that. And
Mhm.
every stage is like, oh man, this is a whole new way to engage with them and to enjoy them and to try to help them navigate life. And so middle school, has been a challenge for all four of them,
Yeah.
but it's super rewarding and a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's interesting because it looks like there was a big gap in between your kids, and so you're getting to like repeat, like what,
Yes,
you know? Do you think that
absolutely.
you've like taken from like your daughters into how you're like parenting your middle school boys? Was there anything like that?
Well, you know, interestingly enough,
Mhm.
every child is so unique.
Yeah.
And although there are things that I think, I probably incorporated,
Mhm.
um, it all it always feels like a new journey. It's like, yeah, I've not ever had that sense of, oh yeah, I've done this, I got this down. It's always like, oh Lord, here we go. Like now what? It's just
Yeah.
every piece of it's got its own new challenge.
Yeah, well, let's if you don't mind, I'd love to hear more about your father
Yeah,
a little bit. So, tell me more about your dad. What was he like? Stuff like that.
yeah. My father, gosh, he was such a unique person,
Mhm.
very wounded, uh, no, no real healing of some of the wounds of his childhood,
Mhm.
which then manifest, of course, all through his life. Um, he was a really simple man, and he had an elementary school education. He didn't go to high school.
Mhm.
Um, he's very simple. He loved to farm. He loved the earth and the land, and you know, just good hard work. And so that was a whole lot of who he was and what he did, and some of the things that he passed on to me. Um, I've always told people that to be uneducated, he was really a thinker. Like he was very philosophical about the things he would say and the way he would interact with the world and with life. Um, he was really a mixed bag, and he was a very angry person. I mean,
Mhm.
growing up, one of my biggest fears is that my dad would kill someone and end up in prison,
Yeah.
because he often carried a gun and he was just angry. I mean, he was angry.
Mhm.
Um, so those are kind of the highlights of things that stand out to me about my dad. Now he was, like I say, he was a hard worker, committed to diligence in everything he did. And he had very simple expectations of life. Like He wasn't kind of trying to live the American dream or um, pursue lots of money. He took life pretty simply, pretty much at face value. He found pleasure where he could find it, and he worked
Mhm.
hard.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, you were in the book. You talk about how he mentioned it was about fighting. I think he said don't look for the fight, but if you can't get out of one or something like that, make sure you win it.
Yeah, yeah,
I just
yeah. I
that's
mean, that and it's one of the things that I hope to make the point in this book is like when I became a father, I was terrified
Mhm.
because I didn't have a great role model. And I'd hear people say things like, "Oh, one of the things my dad always told me," and I would think, I don't think my dad ever told me anything. I mean, it's just
Mhm.
I didn't have that sense of there was, mom and dad separated when I was 12, and so and a lot of my life while he was living with us, there was no connection. He was very
Mhm.
absent even when he was there. Um, and so I just, I mean, I can remember so distinctly thinking, I just don't have values that have been given to me from my father. Like this is important, or those little nuggets of wisdom that your dad said to you over and over, or that just kind of took. Like I didn't have any of that. And I've reflected over it over and over through the years. I just don't
Mhm.
have any of that. The only thing I can ever remember my dad saying to me in a way of father to son advice was what you were just quoting.
Yeah. Hmm.
You know, I don't want you to be a fighter,
Hmm.
but if you're going to if you can't get out of the fight, make sure you throw the first punch and don't quit hitting until you won. That was it. That was it. I mean, that is all the wisdom that my father intentionally ever gave me.
Yeah, it's
And
it's go ahead, what were you saying?
and yet, and that's one of the things I hope is conveyed in the book is, and yet I learned so much about life by my father, who
Mhm.
I didn't even live that close to. I mean, like we didn't live in the same home a lot of my childhood. He was distant, and yet he had a huge impact on my life. And that's part of what I want dads to realize is,
Mhm.
you may not be just the fount of wisdom that you're pouring out to your kids every day, and yet they're learning from your life. And they're learning some things maybe you don't want them to learn, but they're learning a whole lot of really good things. I learned like amazing things from my father. And he was, not the most amazing man in the world,
Mhm.
but I really learned a lot of good life values from him.
Well, it's interesting that you say how much you've learned even though it's distance, because it's like kids see everything
Yeah.
that we're doing.
Oh,
Um,
yes, I did.
and I mean, I got to witness that as a teacher for 10 years and I taught elementary education, and just the things that they learned, most of the things they learned from me very rarely were things that I taught. Like
Yes,
the lessons, it was the things they saw me doing. It was my actions, and it was my actions and it was my reactions.
absolutely.
Those two things, like how I reacted to people, the other teachers, the principals, how I reacted to them, they would learn from that, good or bad. And then
Absolutely.
the actions are the same thing. And it's always really cool to just, whenever I had a former student come to me and they would say this one thing that they did, or one thing that I did, and it was like they learned so much, and I was just like, you saw that? I don't even remember what you're talking about, you know?
Right. Right.
And it's that little sponge brain of them as kids.
Yep.
You just pick
Yeah.
up on it.
And I think that's so, just magnify that with fatherhood.
Yeah.
And, in my situation, I didn't even I didn't even realize what I was learning. I
Hmm.
didn't realize what I was picking up. And it would have been, I mean, I was an adult having children before I
Hmm.
saw some of this stuff. And I'm still kind of exploring, going, oh, wow, I see the world that way because that's how dad saw the world.
Hmm.
And it's just, although he and I are extremely different people, there's so much of an impact that he had on my life. And I think, that's one of the ways I want to encourage fathers is you are having a huge impact on your kids, whether you're in their life every day and super present and really trying, or whether you're very disengaged or maybe not even in the home,
Mhm.
you're still having an impact.
Yeah. Do you think that was it hard to reconcile with that? Like, did you grow up thinking like, was there like a drive, like I'm not gonna be like him? And then you were able to just, as you got older, see the good things about that instead of just like, I'm just, because I hear a lot of times, I'm determined not to be that guy, right?
Right. Right.
So yeah,
Yeah.
speak on that a little bit for us.
I think for the most part, I just was determined not to have certain parts of who dad was, like,
Hmm.
because in a big way, I think as I was growing up and even as a teenager, like, I think I saw my dad as just kind of innocuous. Like,
Hmm.
he wasn't like a terrible, terrible guy. I mean,
Hmm.
I start the book with a story that is pretty terrible, but I don't see him as just like, I didn't see him as like this terrible, awful person. More just like, he's just there. He's dad and
Hmm.
whatever, and he's got some issues, and I want to stay away from those. But it wasn't like, oh gosh, I don't ever want to be like him, because I just didn't. I didn't feel like he was making enough impact on my life that I ever had to worry about that.
Yeah.
And
Got it.
yet he was. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah. So what are some things that like, are there things that you catch yourself doing or saying that you're like, yep, that's my dad? Has stuff like that come up?
Oh yeah, for sure. I
Hmm.
constantly. I think one of the things that you know I I've, I see my father is he
Hmm.
always wanted to help other people, and dad was never financially successful. He always, pretty much always, lived on the margin financially.
Hmm.
Farmers don't make lots of money, especially not in Northeast Tennessee. That's not where you
Nope,
do big
they don't.
farming.
Hmm.
And then he did simple like mechanic jobs. He worked at a bowling alley and
Hmm.
he took care of the machines in the back, and so he was a machinist and didn't make a lot of money there. But he was always one of the first people who would give to you. If we never passed a Salvation Army bell ringer, that dad didn't give money. And I can remember being in the bowling alley and somebody died or there's a sickness or whatever, and they're going to take up money. And dad would always put in, like, to me at that point as a younger kid, is like a lot of money. I'd be like, oh my gosh, like, wow. And so I saw him kind of model caring about other people,
Hmm.
and I think that's an important part of what's happened for me. That I do want to help others and take care of people, and
Hmm.
it's everything from adopting an orphan to working with folks locally who have financial needs. So, just kind
Hmm.
of the whole of life. I look back and go, okay, I don't want to do that because I'm a nice person. I want to do that because I saw that modeled. And it just seems like the way to live life. And
Yeah.
so,
Hmm. 100%. Like, I saw that in my father as well. I saw that in my grandfathers. That act of giving was foundational
yeah,
to them on levels that, I had. I mean, I probably, I don't even understand. I mean, my grandfather from West Tennessee on there. I mean, they had a farm. You were saying that farmers from Northeast Tennessee don't make a lot. I think farmers in West Tennessee don't make a lot either.
yeah,
But there was always giving of something to people from the church, people, their neighbors. What it could be food, vegetables, whether or not a tree fell, they were the first people there to help.
absolutely.
My dad's side, he's from Ohio. I mean, my grandfather over there, he was going to nursing homes well into his 90s just to hang out with them and
That's
to be
awesome.
present with these people. So I saw that. And then my father was the same way. I don't think we ever passed a homeless person on the street. If he didn't have money, he was giving him the food he was eating. I remember one time he had a bag of Chex Mix and he didn't have any money. He said, "This is all I got. Here you go." And then the guy just took his bag of Chex Mix and we just drove off. And it's just like
Awesome.
seeing that I can resonate with what you're saying. It's just this is how the world works. We're
Yeah,
supposed to do this stuff.
absolutely.
Yeah, there's the sentence in here. It says, "I am marked by my father's values." You wrote that on page 39, by the way. And that's such a powerful, powerful statement. Um, and it's powerful that you can see that through who he was, like through the negative or quote unquote negative, you're able to find the positive through that. And that's a powerful thing for people to hear. It's like and it's no matter how hard we try, we end up being like our parents in some form or fashion.
Oh yeah, I absolutely. To me, that is one of the funniest things about being a parent is I
Mhm.
just laugh with and at my kids. When they're doing
Yeah,
like, I will never say that to my. And I'm like, okay, I just hope I live long enough to hear you say it. Because you will. Yeah.
man, it's I whistle like him and it makes me feel weird when I
Yeah.
did it the first time, or just it's the little stuff that I'm saying and it's like it's coming out and it's just like the wow. I can't I can't stop it. My wife says I even walk like him.
Yeah. 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 And I tell my kids all the time. I mean, it's one of the things I say the most is
Mhm.
they'll do something that either reminds me of me or reminds me of my wife, and I'm like,
Yeah.
you know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Yep.
And like I just say that over and over. And so one day I said that to one of my daughters. They'd done
Mhm.
something. I'm like, "Hey, baby, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." And she's like, "I'm trying to roll." She's like,
Trying to
"I'm
roll.
hoping for downhill." I'm like, "Well, don't count on it. That's all I can tell you."
That's funny. Oh, that's funny. So you mentioned that you adopted a child. Where did the inspiration for that come from? Was it like spur of the moment, or has it been a part of your life that you've always wanted to do? I don't know.
Yeah. Before we were married, my wife and I talk, of course, you have all the conversations about children in the future and what you want things to look like. And, um, you know, at that point, we talked about it would be wonderful to get the opportunity to adopt, and
Mhm.
that at some point we would maybe consider adoption. And through the years, we'd done foster care and just different kinds of work with a variety of different children. But we talked about adopting before we were
Mhm.
married. Um, she had gone to work in a orphanage in
Mhm.
India and with a church and an orphanage in India, uh, pretty pretty much right out of high school, and spent some time over there. And I had done some mission work in India from time to time, and so we both kind of not kind of we both had a heart for the nation of India and for the culture and the people. And so anyway, we talked about adopting, and um, just never did. We had that initial conversation before marriage, and then you have your first child, and then you have your second child, and we'd done some foster care in between there along the way, and there just never seemed to be the space to adopt. Not to mention it's not free, and so there wasn't really the finances to adopt, and there wasn't the energy and the space, and so we just didn't. And then after we'd been married for a while and had both of the girls, and they were 6 and 8, something like that, and we kind of re-engaged with the thought of, do we want to consider adopting now? And we decided that it probably was just too late. That
Mhm.
I'm a little bit older than she is, and um, I just felt like, if I adopt at this point, adopted an infant,
Mhm.
then I'm just going to be too old to be an effective dad. I won't be able to be the dad I want to be. And so we just kind of talked ourselves out of it and moved on down the road a little bit. And we had a little surprise. We we had a baby on the way. So
Yeah.
when we found out that she was pregnant, it was right in the time that we found out she was pregnant, or shortly thereafter. I just said to her, we were talking again about adoption because we've got this little boy who's got 9 years between him and his closest sibling. It's like, hate for him to grow up alone and don't really want. And so we're like, hey, maybe if, because we were doing all the things you do not to have children. And so we had him. And so it kind of, there's a great story about all that.
Mm-hmm.
My middle daughter, she's my youngest daughter, had been praying for a year for a baby brother.
Ah,
And I mean, it was constant. She prayed and prayed. She'd ask me and my wife, she's like, can I have a baby brother? I want a baby brother. And I'm like, and so finally, really just out of annoyance, I finally said to her one day, honey, if like mom and I don't want any more kids, like we're done. Like
yeah.
we're not going to have any more children. If you want a baby brother, you'll have to talk to God about that. Why in the world I ever said that? Who knows? And so she starts praying for a baby brother, anyway. So I said to my wife after he was born, I'm like, if God doesn't think I'm too old to be a dad, then maybe I'm not. Maybe we should consider adopting. And so we started down that road.
That's cool. And you talk about it was kind of tough financially. I mean, the whole process is challenging to say the least.
I would say it's grueling. Yeah, it really is. It's a grueling process.
And how long did it take for you to you start the process and then he's in your arms?
It was over a year.
Uh-huh.
And it's been long enough now. It's been about 8 years ago. So I can't, those dates are not going to come well for me, but it was a very long process. And part of what made it seem even longer was we did all the initial groundwork and the home visits and the studies and just all the stuff. And then we had this referral really quick, which typically referrals take a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so our referral was like quick. And so we thought, oh man, this is going to be fast. This is amazing. And then nothing happened for months and months and months and months. And it was a really long. And at that point, we adopted from India. And so at that point, the government in India was not real favorable of adoptions outside of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't even really very favorable of adoption. And so they just had roadblock after roadblock. And our paperwork ended up stuck in a bureaucrat's office who wouldn't sign it. And he couldn't send it back because there was nothing wrong with it, but he just wouldn't sign it. And I'm talking like 6 months that this process went on of him it's just sitting there. And finally, we had to appeal to a judge who sent him an order to sign the paperwork or give reasons why he wasn't going to. And it still took, it just was awful. That was a long, long process.
Man, how did your kids take to the idea of adoption? Was that hard for them?
No, it really wasn't. My youngest daughter prayed in my oldest son, and my oldest daughter prayed in my youngest son, because she really felt like, she came to me in a church service one day and said, Dad, I think we're supposed to adopt. And this was before we had decided we were even open to it again. She's like, I really feel like we're supposed to adopt. And I said, well, honey, that's great. If God said that to you, he probably means for you to adopt. That's probably not about me. That's probably about you. And so, but lo and behold, it turned out to be about me.
Man, well, that's awesome.
So both of the kids were super. And that does not mean that it hasn't been really hard on our family, because you know, as I've mentioned, Kabir has some special needs and some difficulties. And
Hmm.
the thing that makes it really hard is he presents really well. Like you would never look at my son and go, "Oh, he's special needs." And yet, his developmental abilities and his IQ and his functioning memory are just really, really low.
Hmm.
And so it makes his life very difficult, and it makes the people around his life very difficult as well. And so, although they were all very much in favor, and we were all very much in favor, it's not been easy. There's been a whole lot of humor and laughter, and I mean, one of my favorite stories that every time I would go to school, they're always doing the whole, well, today, a beer, they're just
Hmm.
always this. And, again, sometimes I wish I was a better parent, but it's just like, I got so tired of hearing it. I'd just be like, oh, and I'm not even listening because I can't fix it because he doesn't even remember what he did. By the time he leaves you
Hmm.
to get to me, he has no idea what I'm talking about. So
Yeah.
it's very hard to teach into that, or to
Hmm.
instruct or anyway. So this one particular day, I come in and his helper, who was an exceptionally negative young lady, starts into, well, today, Kabir, and I was just on the verge of tuning her out. And she says, although I always tried to act like, oh, oh my
Yeah.
gosh,
Hmm.
but in my heart, I'm like, oh, what? I mean, I can't fix it. Anyway, so this day, she says, so today, Kabir bit the librarian on the butt. Okay, I howled. I mean, because he's just at this point, he's in first grade and he's tiny anyway. And so I can just see this little teeny tiny kid reaching out and biting this woman's bottom. I couldn't stop laughing. And then the other thing that I knew at this point, he was biting. And so he had bitten my son on the chest and left teeth marks. I mean, imprinted black and blue
Yeah.
teeth marks. And so I can just imagine her going home to her husband with black and blue teeth marks on her butt and trying to explain that. Oh no, it's this little kid in school. I'm like, I got so tickled. I laughed and laughed about that. But so raising Kabir has had its challenges, and it's pushed all of us.
Yeah.
But the kids were all very much, on board with the adoption,
Hmm.
and we are a family, all of us together.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know any person who wouldn't have laughed in that situation.
And so I hope the teacher laughed. I mean, it was funny.
I mean, I've been, I mean, it's so like I'm putting myself at like the teacher's seat because I mean I've been in situations like that. I haven't been bit on the butt, but you get hit, you get touched. It's just interesting. It's weird, and
Uh-huh.
you got to talk about it. But I mean that's funny. Don't
Oh,
doesn't matter who you are. It's
yes,
pretty funny.
yes, yes.
Mhm. So is it, I mean, do you think that's been the hardest thing about being a father is just, the bringing in of the whole adoption, like that kind of thing, or has there been something else?
I think that has been a huge challenge for
Hmm.
sure. Um, I think probably the that's the most I think that's the most challenging thing we've done as a family
Hmm.
is to adopt him, and then to find out that there's a lot of special needs there. And I mean, he's an amazing young man. Oh my gosh, he's funny and he's lively and he's a joy.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
he asks, the things that your toddlers are doing right now, of asking the
Hmm.
same question over and over and asking questions constantly.
Hmm.
He's 12 and does that, like it
Yeah.
never stops. And there's so many things that are super challenging, um,
Hmm.
but so much joy. And man, have I got the opportunity to grow, so
Yeah.
much
Hmm.
opportunity for personal growth, and just to be more compassionate with
Hmm.
with other parents and with the world, because you know, our other three children are academically, they do great.
Hmm.
Socially, they do well. There's just, they're pretty easy to parent.
Yeah.
And it would be easy to think, oh, that, gosh, man, I did a great job raising those kids.
Mm.
And then really to have a child that's a little more challenging, that has some different requirements, and to realize how limited you are. It's been good. And it's
Mm.
given me just the opportunity to pray a lot, to really draw on God and his wisdom,
Hmm.
and to face my own limitations, and just to be able to say, my wife and I will just say to each other, like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I need this will be, I'm going to have to walk away. You're going to have to do something. And, sometimes that's her saying it to me, and sometimes it's me saying it to her, but it's just, it can be hard.
Yeah, and it sounds like, I love that you said it's like knowing your limits. I think a lot of us don't. I know I don't like to face my limits. I like to go past my limits.
Absolutely.
I like to like ignore the warning signs and then go and just keep going. And every
Yes.
time that I've done that, that's when the damage comes and I'm having to work backwards, and like it's hard for men, I think, to do that.
Right.
We want to be able to do everything, fix everything. But to be in a situation like you're in, I mean, knowing your limits it's got to be paramount, and reaching out,
Absolutely.
you know. And it sounds like you're holding on to the joy a lot, which is good, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I say all the time, one of my favorite things in life is being dad. And
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. I get just so much energy out
Mhm.
of being with my kids and watching them grow and learn and develop. And
Mhm.
it is one of the best things of my life. And even in the challenges, it's still, I love it.
Yeah. That's awesome. Is there anything that sort of I don't know, scares you about being a dad still?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that scares me about life, about
Hmm.
being a dad, especially, but it scares me in every area of life. And because a lot of the areas that I find myself in, I'm leading people.
Hmm.
I own the business, or I'm leading the camp, or I'm, whatever it is. And I think I forget the power of my influence,
Hmm.
because I know me from the inside out, and I know what a goof I am. Like, I
Yeah.
don't, I know how limited my perspective is sometimes. I know how I'll say something and not really mean that, but the people around me don't know that.
Hmm.
And so I think one of the scariest things for me in parenting is the impact that I will unintentionally have on my children. When they're super, I, I I heard this when my girls were little, and I think it has been a guiding principle for my life. I've sure tried for it to be that we should respond to our kids as a reflection of their excitement. Because
Mm.
your kids will come to you and they'll be just, oh, daddy, look at this, look at this, look at this, and it's just like it's a beat up old doll that you've seen 1,000 times. It's like, oh, but
Hmm.
and so what happens is I just squashed their excitement and their enthusiasm and their love for life and their love for that toy, or maybe it's their drawing, or whatever it is. And I don't mean to like twist their perspective of life, but I've had a
Yeah.
bad day and I'm tired, and really, in the whole scheme of things, that isn't important. And so I miss the excitement that they have, and I dampen it instead of reflecting back to them their enthusiasm. And so I worry about that. How much do I do that with just, I've had a bad day and my son, whatever, and I snap at him, and it's nothing. But what
Mhm.
he just heard is, I'm really not that important. Or this thing that I love isn't that important.
Yeah.
My my oldest son loves to play video games. And I
Mhm.
mean, of course, as do most teenage boys. But that's really not my thing. I'm a director of a camp. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I'm an outdoor person and I run marathons and I like that's and so I don't really, I mean, we try to set some parameters for how much he can game, but I don't mind that he games. I'm happy that that's something he enjoys doing. He's good at. He gets, pleasure out of that. That's all fine.
Mhm.
But it's so easy because it is so not who I am or what I enjoy, just to unintentionally have a negative vibe. Does that
Yeah.
make sense? And
Mhm.
to leave
It
him
does.
feeling like I don't approve. And it's not that I don't approve of what he's doing. He feels like I don't approve of him because he
Mhm.
likes that. And so I'm always trying to see those things in my life and think, gosh, how did he hear that? How did that feel to, right now, right now, I'm thinking with my youngest son, how is he hearing when I keep saying to him, I'm not going to answer that question again. I've answered it 10 times. The answer hasn't changed. And I just can't keep answering it.
Mhm.
And so I'm asking myself, what is he hearing? Is he hearing that he's not important? Is he hearing that his needs aren't going to be met? Is he like, what I'm trying to say is stop asking me that question you already know the answer to. But
Mhm.
but then I worry, what's he hearing? So one of my biggest fears is just the unintentional consequences of my um, unthought through words or
Yeah.
actions.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think about that a lot. Have you ever read the book The Four Agreements?
No.
There's this book Four Agreements, and it's this guy it's just four agreements for life, and one of them is be impeccable with your word. And what he means by that isn't just like being truthful, it's like what you're saying. And he has this story of this little girl who had this beautiful voice, and she's singing and singing and singing and singing, and her mother comes in and just had a rough day, and she just needs some quiet. And so
Right.
instead of saying like, hey, I'm glad you're singing, I need a little bit of quiet, she reacts and she yells,
Mm,
and then that girl never sings again.
yes.
And
That's
it's
exactly what I'm talking about.
and I think about that with my reaction to my son, because I'm doing a lot of deep dive in sort of my life, why I have the podcast, and just in how I got to where I am with like people and church institutions and things like that. And so, I mean, that type of stuff is what keeps me up at night.
Right.
I try to, if the biggest goal for me in parenting is, if I react to him in a little bit of time, there's going to be a sort of reconnect. Like
Yes.
one day, oh my God, he wouldn't get out of the playground when I was picking him up from school, and I had a hurt shoulder and I had to get under and get him, and it just aggravated it. And then he was giggling because he didn't know, because he was
Right.
3. And
Right.
I just screamed when he was in the car, and no one talked. But then after, it was about after a few streets, I stopped the car and I went and I talked to him, and it was, I think, my hope is that that's powerful in the right way. Like he sees, okay, no, dad still cares. This is what happens. But I mean, words create a reality, you
Yes.
know?
I,
So,
Roy, I think you hit it dead on the, just right on the head. Is we're always going to we're going to make those mistakes.
hmm
And although they might cause some, issues or damage or whatever, it's when you can own them
hmm
and apologize for them, then I think that helps to undo whatever you did. And
hmm
B, I think it teaches our kids how to live life.
yeah.
That people people aren't always going to do things right. You're not always going to do things right. The thing that's
Mhm.
important is to take ownership of what you've done and do what you
Mhm.
can to correct it. One of the things I've said to my kids is, if I was a perfect parent, if I did everything right,
Mhm.
then I would do you a disservice because you would never have the opportunity to learn to forgive someone,
Mhm.
to learn to live, because nobody else in the world is perfect. And so if I were perfect, I would be
Mhm.
the only one.
Yeah.
And so I would teach you to have an expectation of life that just will never happen for you again because
Mhm.
people are going to do things wrong. So if I'm perfect or if I'm imperfect, I'm going to mess you up. And so you can't get out of childhood without getting messed up. That's just a
Mhm.
part of it. And then you
Yeah.
have to deal with your own stuff. Uh, but to be able to acknowledge it to your kids and to take responsibility, I believe that's huge.
Yeah, and I mean, you think about how many people in our lives just seemed like they were infallible, and I land on teachers a lot because that's what I did. And I used to, I never hid my mistakes. I never hid anything that I wrote wrong. If I messed a kid's name up, anything like that, like you just had to own it because I felt that my mistakes are the bigger teacher than me hiding it from them. You know,
Absolutely. I so agree with that.
because kids are deathly afraid of making mistakes, especially around their parents, and people of
Yeah.
authority.
Yeah.
So no, it's great. I'm glad that you shared that. What's been like, what's been the easiest thing about parenting?
I think the easiest thing for me, I don't even know if this really answers this question, but it's one of the things that just,
Mhm.
when you say the easiest thing, I have always been surprised how easy it is to love my kids. And
Mhm.
maybe that sounds stupid, but
No.
I've tried to say to people, like, there's no one in my life that I didn't at some point make a conscious decision to love except my kids.
Mhm.
Like, I can kind of remember when I thought, oh, I really love my parents, even my dad. Like, oh,
Mhm.
I really love my dad. And I remember when I decided, hey, I love my wife. This is a girl that I want to spend the rest of my life with. I loved it, but it was. I mean, sure, there's feelings and emotions and all that stuff, but there was a decision to it. It's like
Mhm.
I'm gonna go with this, and maybe that's the best way to say it. I'm gonna go with it. I'm gonna let this emotion keep growing.
Mhm.
With my kids, that never happened. As soon as I saw them, it's like, oh my gosh, like I'm just engaged. And so, one of the things I find myself saying to my kids all the time is, I will always love you. I may not always like you.
Mhm.
I might always like the things you do, but there won't ever be a moment in your life that I don't love you. And that just comes super easy for me. So I think that's
Yeah.
part of it.
Yeah. I'm always surprised at how much I care about this kid.
Yeah,
Like, I mean,
yeah,
it's just, it's like, wow. I mean, it's like you're saying with like your wife, you realize why you love her. Like,
yeah,
and it came on. It wasn't like immediate. It might have been immediate, like love at first sight, but there was conscious things. And then it's like, oh, okay, no, I love her. I love her. I love her. And it just kind of built. But I mean, I've known this kid 4.5 years. He can bear, I mean, he's just now talking, and I'm surprised at how much I care. It
yeah.
blows me away.
Absolutely. I mean, and so for me, that's one of the kind of fun, easy things about being a dad is I've never had to work on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of want to pivot a little bit because you run a youth camp,
I
and
do.
I love that because I grew up going to a camp. I got to start when I was 10, go there all the way up to when I, aged out, and I got to be a counselor on a volunteer basis, and then I got to spend 4 years as like a paid person at the camp. And our camp, it was a church camp. It was week long. You would go, and it was typical cabins, the whole 9 yards, stuff like that. And I attribute that as one of the main things that that kept me sane.
Yeah, yeah.
That helped me find my way through life as this not typical sort of kid. And I don't know, that I believe that there's power in camps, that there's power in being outside. I was thinking about your quote in your book. It said a little bit of blood means you're having fun.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
um I think I love that there's summer camps. My hope is that my kid will like them. We'll see. But tell me a little bit about your camp.
Well, it sounds like it might be similar. I heard one of your podcasts where you were talking to, I guess, the now director of the camp
Yeah.
that you went to,
Hmm.
and so I think it might be similar in some ways to
Hmm.
that camp. We would call it a outdoor adventure camp,
Hmm.
and it is a Christian camp.
Hmm.
We do two different programs. We do uh, day camps
Hmm.
for kids that are coming out of kindergarten through fifth grade. And then we do overnight, week long residential camps for middle school and high school kids.
Hmm.
And then pretty much, all the activities that you would probably expect. We do, everything from paintball to rock climbing to, caving to archery, all those just kind of campy events.
Yeah. What's the name of the camp?
It's called Pathfinders
Cool.
Youth Camp.
And did you inherited it? Did you found it? Like, were you like, I want to start this camp? Did you grow up going to camps?
It's such a weird story. I had never been to a camp. I did not go to camp as a kid.
Wow.
I had been a youth pastor. And
Hmm.
as a youth pastor, I took my kids to a week long camp.
Hmm.
And what I found was that in 1 week at camp, they experienced as much personal growth as they did with me in a year of youth services.
Hmm.
I mean, it was just phenomenal. It changed their lives uh, with perspective and just, I mean, I don't know if I can even explain the
Hmm.
uh, magic of camp. I mean,
Yeah. Hmm.
I've been doing it now, running a camp for about 50, no, for 20 years now. And I don't know if I can explain the magic of it because
Hmm.
you just bring kids together who don't know each other, maybe haven't ever experienced a camp environment. And this magic happens. It's pretty phenomenal. Um, so I'd never been to camp, and then I took my youth group kids to a camp one time, and then I came to a place in life where I was really evaluating, trying to make some changes in life, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, what I wanted to
Hmm.
be, just kind of really doing some deep dive into life. And I had taken some extended time off and was spending a lot of time just by myself, reading and reflecting and trying to figure out who I wanted to be and how I wanted to do life and how I wanted to engage in life.
Hmm.
And in that process, um, I realized that what I wanted to do in life was make a difference for the next generation. Like
Hmm.
that's really what I want to do. I want to empower and equip emerging generations to discover and fulfill their destiny. And after I kind of came up with that, here's what I want my life to look like. Here's my
Hmm.
thesis statement for life. Um, then I started exploring, well, how am I going to do that? What's it going to look like? What's the best way for me to make the biggest impact I can make on the next generation so that they can experience God and find direction in their life and find out who they want to be and how can I give them tools and empower them to be who they want to be.
Hmm.
And so in that process, I decided that probably the most effective thing I could do would be to start a youth camp. And so I did not inherit the youth camp. We, myself and two other guys, just kind of had this. They bought into my vision that this would be a good thing to do, and we'll all kind of go at it together. And we started out doing just outdoor adventure programs. We take at risk, predominantly kids from the projects, and go backpacking and spend anywhere from 2 or 3 days to a week in the woods, hiking and backpacking and rock climbing, and just all the parallels to life that you experience when you're doing those kinds of things, of teamwork and communication and having to have your stuff together, make sure you know what you need for the journey, and just so many life lessons, that we would explore out of that. But that's how we started, was doing outdoor adventure things. It used the Appalachian Trail and lots of different just natural local places. And then we started looking for land to buy and to develop into a camp, and eventually bought 77 acres and have been developing a youth camp.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, camps are very magical places. I know you were talking about the last interview with Steve, the director of our camp. Our camp's called the Swamp. It got the name because it's just near a swamp. They thought it was funny. But there's a lot of things, like on paper, it rarely makes sense.
Yeah.
To be just get a bunch of people that barely know each other and just be in the woods for a week. Yeah. And then the magic that happens when you're there, it's just hard to describe.
It really is.
And it's really fun. I remember just as a counselor watching how fun it is to just see these kids who are, you would quote unquote call them indoor kids, and then just love it, being outside and being away from everything and just coming up with stuff. And the biggest thing for us was just coming up with games. Like a lot of the games that we play was just games that some kid came up with 30 years ago.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And it's so that's cool that you have it. So is it so you have the summer camp, and then you say you host people as well,
we do retreats and various kind of events throughout the year, but most our focus is on the camps. We do field trips for schools and a lot of different things like that as well.
Sweet. Have you ever thought about doing adult summer camp?
I've been asked to do that. It's but we've never quite taken that step.
It'd be really funny to see a bunch of adults acting like kids in that environment.
A lot of fun.
Yeah. So, one of the big things for me in this podcast is talking about balance and talking about voicing your needs and getting what you need as a father in order to serve the needs of your family. So what are some things that you do that help serve you so that you can, be a present father?
Yeah. I think this is probably an area that I struggle with maybe most. I struggle with it a lot anyway. Because I tend to be kind of a type A personality, and I'm pretty driven, and I've got my hands in a lot of different things. And then I'm really committed to being a father, to being present, to engaging with my kids. And so then that doesn't leave much for me, and looking back on life, I've realized that I probably would be in a little bit healthier place if I had taken more time to take care of me, and just the things that I need. And I'm still probably struggling with that, but I think I'm doing a little bit better.
Yeah.
And, some of the things that I had put in place early in life that were very helpful for me were just to have times that I would go and be alone, and not huge amounts of time. Like originally, my ideal was that, once a week I would take just an hour and go just be in the woods and just kind of just me, just be alone. um, walk, and then kind of once a month, I'd try to do a couple 3 or 4 hours, do like a Saturday morning of just me being alone.
Mhm.
And then once a quarter, I would try to do an overnight where I would just be me alone. And and I followed that pattern pretty well for a number of years. And then as family responsibilities and job responsibilities and you know running a camp and running businesses and just all the different things kept growing, it became harder and harder to do that. And really, I
Mhm.
lost focus on that as well. And so I think I would have been, especially for my daughters, I think I would have been a little more engaged as a father. I'd had a little more reserve if I
Mhm.
had done better at that. And really, I feel that same way now. I mean, I said I'm doing a little better, but I don't know if I am or not because with,
Mhm.
especially with my special needs son, if I get too tired, if I get too back to back,
Mhm.
then I just don't have the resources I need to be a good dad. I
Yeah.
just don't. I'm too edgy. I'm too quick to respond. I'm not thoughtful enough. And so I think that is an ongoing challenge for all of us as dads. I remember distinctly when Kabir was probably 3 years old,
Mhm.
just had come home, and he wasn't sleeping, and he was crying all night, and he was screaming and fretful, and it had been night after night after night after night after night, and truly, like, we were just exhausted, and he was terrified. I mean, he was in a new country with people who didn't speak his language. I mean, he was. I tell him all the time he's the bravest person I know, because
Mhm.
he's been able to move forward through some of that. But anyway, this particular night, my wife had been in there with him, and she came in and woke me up. She's like, "I just can't do this anymore." And so I went in, and I'm laying in the floor beside of his crib, holding his hand through the crib, and he's screaming, and I just all of a sudden I'm like, I am not a safe person to be with this child right now. Like,
Mhm.
I need help. And there was such a uh, I don't even know the word. It was so clear to me that our culture doesn't create a safe enough place because you know it's easy to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe anybody abused their child, and I can't
Mhm.
believe, but you know what? You probably just not ever had the right circumstance because that night I thought I could hurt this kid. Like, not, I mean, he's making me crazy. I mean, and I'm sleep deprived for days, and I mean, I just didn't have anything left.
Yeah.
And so realizing that, and knowing, hey, there's moments in your life that you've just got to step back and say,
Mhm.
I can't do this. I've got to have help, and I've got to have somebody I can call. And I think, to have a network of friends and family and is huge.
Yeah.
And then you've got to have enough sense to call on them.
You're saying it, man. I mean, that's important for what you're saying. Thank you again for being honest with that. I think for every dad that listens to this, to your story and to what that is, we've all been there. There's probably not a parent that would ever hear what you're saying and be like, no, that's crazy. We've all been sleep deprived when our
Right.
kid won't be doing X, Y, or Z, or we've been in a situation where we're trying to teach them something and they're not listening. And it just gets you to that place.
Yeah.
And it takes courage to say, hey, I don't got this, or I need help.
Yeah.
And I think more of us, and I think it's important for us as fathers to share that, because we don't feel alone and it makes it more of a normal thing
Right.
for us to
And I
talk
think
about that.
absolutely. And I think, for us to share it with among ourselves. And,
Hmm.
I think it's so important, especially with your sons
Mhm.
that you share with your sons when it's
Yeah.
appropriate,
Mhm.
at age appropriate times and moment appropriate. Just, hey, this is, let me tell you a story about, because we want to tell the stories of all the good things we do, and
Mhm.
all of our successes and all of our, our sports, but I sat down with my son recently and said, he'd just kind of blown a situation and he was kind of embarrassed. And I said, let me tell you a story where I did that, you
Mhm.
could just see him being like, oh my gosh, like, because we forget how much they look up to us.
Mhm.
And if we can kind of just step down and go, hey, the struggle's real for all of us who are human.
Mhm.
And so it's okay that you feel like you made a fool of yourself at school and you're embarrassed and people do that. Let me tell you when I
Yeah.
did something like that. And
Mhm.
I just think it was real helpful for our kids if we can share those moments of vulnerability.
Yeah, the more that we can make vulnerability a normal thing
Right.
for us as men and boys, guys, I mean, it makes handling emotions so much easier. Um,
Absolutely.
because I think, for the longest time we just stuffed it all down. I mean, as a society and as men, I
Right.
mean, that's what we're taught. I don't know. I want my son to see me cry. I want my son to I want to have those conversations with him because I want
Right.
him to, I don't know, maybe not have it as tough as I did, you
Yeah.
know? So,
But one of the things I say to my kids and especially to the
mhm.
boys is there are things worth crying over.
Mhm.
It's
Yep.
okay. There are
Mhm.
things worth crying about.
Yeah, we tell our kid, anger's fine. Anger's
Yes.
okay.
Yep.
Uh, crying is okay. There's a step past that we need to talk about that you can do, but just because you're angry doesn't mean anything. Like, it's okay. You're disappointed that this isn't happening. I
Right.
get it, you know?
Yeah.
So, so what do you think, like, super powerful stuff, Nick? I just wanted to say that real quick. Thank you for, I've thanked you 3 times, but it's honesty is so important in this platform, long form conversations about that. So thank you for that. What do you think your role is as a dad? Is it teacher, protector, guider? Is it, a couple of things? Would you mind
Yeah.
sharing some?
It is another thing that I think is, for me is super important is to see ourselves not just on um, one plane, I guess you would say. One of the things I've tried to say in the book is that there's different stages of parenting, and at each
Mm-hmm.
stage,
Yeah.
there's something different that you should be bringing to the table.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think, you know, overall, I I believe the best thing I can do as a dad
Mm-hmm.
is maintain relationship and and to be in my kid's life because I'm going to be able to impact and influence them
Mm-hmm.
to the degree that I can keep relationship with them. And I talk about that a little bit in that section about being a dad you can love, or however I
Yeah.
title
Mm-hmm.
that in there, because it's easy to see yourself as the authoritarian or the disciplinarian or the, you know, however you view that. But ultimately, if I can keep relationship with my kids, if I can win and keep their hearts so that they just like me as a person, one of the best compliments I've probably ever gotten in my life is my oldest daughter tells me repeatedly that I'm one of her best friends. Well, gosh, to me, it just doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah.
That was not my goal when she was. I can also remember when she told me as a little kid that she didn't like me.
Mm-hmm.
But when she's small, my goal isn't to be her friend. But when she's an adult, my goal is to be her friend. When she's young, I've got to be a disciplinarian. When she's a little bit older, I've got.
Mm-hmm.
When she's older, I'm going to be a teacher. A little bit older, I've got to be her coach. But
Yeah.
at some point, I get to be her friend. And that's kind of, one of the things I lay out there in the book. But to come to that place in life and for her to, say that, it's like, oh, that's awesome, because I want to keep that kind of relationship. My other adult daughter is working with me in the camp, and she's chosen to, to engage that, and she's the assistant director of the camp. And, to me, to be able to maintain that kind of relationship is a huge part of what my goal is as a parent. Now, again, when they're 2, 3, 4, my goal isn't to be their friend. My goal is to be a disciplinarian. You've got to learn the things that are appropriate in life, and you've got to learn to respond to authority. And if you can't learn, when I say, talk about people that were raised by wolves, that's one of the things I'm thinking about is you never learned to be under authority. And so you can't work a job, because as soon as your boss tells you to go do something, you flip him off and walk away. Well, you're never going to succeed at life, because no one ever taught you that there are authorities in life that they just are, and you've got to deal with that. And so anyway, I don't know if I answered your question. I could ramble on.
You did. No, you did. You mentioned how, like, our relationships as parents, or who we are to our kids, are going to change throughout life. How I'm going to interact with my kid is going to be different 4 years from now than it was now. Right. And the thing that's the most important is if you can keep the relationship threaded through the whole time, that's the power right there.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of kids, they wanted the relationship. They wish they had a relationship. They wish that they could talk to their parents the way that, they feel like they, in a way, or they don't feel like they can talk to their parents. And that's a hard place to be. And so building that relationship and continue and fulfilling it. And a lot of what you're talk about in the book, it kind of is about feeding the relationship, because you talk, like, it's kind of like how your stones, it's like modeling the way, power of being, but then it's like building, your being lovable, self-worth, unconditional love and support. It's just building on that to create a great relationship with your kids.
Right.
That's awesome. And I think that I wanted to talk about sort of with your book. What I loved about the book is it's very, like I said at the beginning, it's very foundational, and I think that's something that for me, it's powerful because I'm still in that stage,
right.
of building the foundation. I even like that there you have that chapter where you have a circle the values.
Yeah.
It's at the end of it. Yeah. End of chapter. Oh my God, I forget I have it right here in like page 105, but it's just really, I think it's important because a lot of times us as dads, we don't think about that. And we need to think about, what is it that we value in life? What do we want for our kids? What do we want for our family? And then just make decisions based off of that. It makes it a little bit easier.
Absolutely. I think when you are able to, and what I hoped to be able to do in that chapter is just to invite dads to, to take a minute and try to narrow down onto what are the things that are important to me. And, everything on that sheet, and there's a lot of things there, they're all important.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all important, but you can't do it all. And I think, God, for me, that's one of the best lessons in life is you can't do it all. And so you focus on the things that are the most important, and so I think that's so valuable, just to come down to what are the things that in every situation I'm going to try to instill, whether it's with words or just actions, or that I'm going to pass on as the values that are important to me and to my wife, to our family.
Cool. Yeah, it's awesome. Any last words for us on this?
I mean, I think probably my last words would be kind of the whole theme that I hope people get out of the book, which is just keep moving forward. You know,
Yep.
you're not going to do it all right. You're not going to be perfect, and you are going to have a huge impact on your kids. And my dad blew it in a lot of ways, and he had amazing positive impact in my life. And I think that's what I want to leave with people is, you know, if you're listening to this podcast, if you care enough to try to grow personally and you're moving in the right directions, just be encouraged, keep going, and you're going to make a difference.
Cool. I like it. Well, Nick, it's been a great talk. Glad to have you on.
Roy, I appreciate it.
Yeah. So the book is Being a Dad You Wish You Had, 5 Big Stones for Effective Fatherhood. I know I found it on Amazon
That's the
as
easiest
well.
place to find it. That is the best place to find it, honestly, is Amazon.
Yeah.
It's there as a digital book as well as a paperback, and there's going to be an audio coming out soon.
Well, that's awesome. All right. Well, take care, guys. Thank you all for listening. And thanks for coming on, Nick.
Thank you, Roy. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, good.